The thief archetype in games is always my favorite, because those are the guys that get to go stealth mode, use multiple blades or a bow, and pull off assassinations. They always have the coolest animations and the most style points. Turn-based anime games aren't famous for having executions, but they are famous for having catgirls to sate your mental illness, and as the CEO of catgirls, I am proud to announce the newest addition to the HSR Brainrot family, Cipher. And today, I'm going to be going over how to build her right after I get over my newest hyperfixation. In today's video, you can expect things like how to build Cipher, where she's good, if you should go for Eidolons, and whether or not it will. My name is Braxophone, but you can call me Brax, and let's talk about Cipher. Cipher is bad. No, not like that bad, she's just hot. In fact, she's quite good as a sub DPS character at E0. By default, with one of her major traces, she gives all enemies a 40% vulnerability, which is a crazy debuff to have all the time. It also gives her 100% more crit damage on her follow-up attacks, but I haven't told you about those yet. The 40% vulnerability, though, is active all the time. All you have to do is exist. Now, Cipher may be one of the easiest characters to understand in all of Amphorius. She's incredibly relatable too, because if I had to hold the entire world together with 2 sticks and a paperclip, I'd probably also spend my remaining days committing petty crime. Her kit's nice and easy, and how I like to understand it is this. Your teammates deal damage, Cipher steals the damage, and then later, Cipher uses the damage again. Her talent automatically applies a debuff to the highest HP enemy called Patron, and this happens whenever there's not a patron on the field. And Cipher's able to move that debuff with her skill or ultimate, like how Topaz is able to move her debuff with her skill. What Patron does is it allows Cipher to be a greedy little goblin and steal some of the damage that you give to enemies. Whenever allies attack the Patron-marked enemies, by default, Cipher takes 12% of that damage to stockpile it for later. With her major traces, she also gets 8% of damage dealt to all non-patron enemies, but there's also another multiplier that makes her able to record even more. When Cipher has 140 or 170 speed, she gains 25 or 50% crit rate, and also records 50% or 100% more. Basically, that means at 170 speed, you get 50 crit rate and 100% more recording, bringing patron recorded damage to 24% and non-patron damage to 16%. It does not, however, record any true damage though. On top of that, enemies marked by patron get follow-up attacked by Cipher once per her turn whenever allies attack. I'm sure most of you are glad to have another follow-up character after so long, but I'm personally more excited about the camera angles. Somehow they trumped every other character so far in creating the camera work for Cipher. With her, there's a little something for everybody. You've got thigh squish, back arch, feet, and for some reason she even meows in your very first meeting. I'll be right back. Or maybe you don't care about that at all and you're just interested in... Whatever your reasons for getting her, I'm sure they're reasonable and fit whatever you're passionate about. Me, I'm more of a jack off of all trades. To release the damage Cipher's been hoarding the entire time, you need to use your ultimate, which does a small multiplier of its own and then spits out everything as true damage to one main and up to 2 adjacent targets. The way it works is 25% of that damage hits the main target by default, and 75% hits the main and adjacent targets. So if there are 3 targets, the 75% gets split 3 ways, 25, 25, 25. That means the main target will take 50% of the true damage, and the 2 adjacent enemies will have 25% each to total the 100%. But if there are no adjacent enemies at all, and it's just the boss, the full 100% will be dealt to the main target. This kind of acts like an execute move. The Ass and Assassin stands for Cipher. Because the multiplier is so small, you can hold the ability for when it works best, which is usually against just the boss. But there are some edge cases where the multiplier from the ultimate can be enough damage in 2 uses to clear a cycle in time. Usually, I'd recommend holding it for the right time at E0, but I know what you are, and you are not holding that ultimate. One great thing about Cipher's true damage mechanic is that it allows you to stockpile damage for windows where you might normally do less. For example, in Apoc Shadow, bosses will have absurd resistances until they're broken. But if you stockpile damage during the first break window, you can use it before the boss is broken the second time and still still get the full results, making Cipher quite effective for Apoc Shadow. One of the major downsides of Cipher though is that she's taken up Ting Yun's mantle for highest taunt value, while having the least HP. I am once again asking, please do not the cat. Cipher's skill is a blast attack that has a 120% base chance to weaken an enemy, which reduces their damage dealt by 10% and increases their attack by 30% for 2 turns. As funny as it is to see Cipher do this, you only need to do it every other turn as opposed to every one, since you can maintain the attack buff that way, and it makes her SP neutral. Her basic attack also has an extra effect that makes me wish I was on the other team. Hoyoverse really knew what they were doing with this character. The angles, the voice casting, everything about her is perfect. Since they've already got the audio and visual senses covered, hopefully smell is next for big 2025. One last thing that Cipher does is literally rob enemies. You can use her technique and run by anyone and you'll yoink their lunch money. She also starts off the fight with a bunch of damage recorded from using her technique before battle, then she records 200% more damage from that instance. Throughout all of the mental illness I've experienced in my life, none have come close to how having an actual cat girl playable in HSR has made me feel. I'm not usually excited about doing chores, but personally, if I was asked to help out around the house, I'd offer to clean the litter box. Editor, you can cut that out actually. For talent priority on Cipher, they're all sort of a scam since her ultimate doesn't affect her true damage. I'd recommend leveling her talent first as well as her skill, and level her ultimate as well, but you don't really need her basic attack. Gearing up Cipher is one of the most important things you can do for her because she takes more attacks than someone talking about something they like online in 2025. An ungeared Cipher is basically just roadkill. Her relic sets aren't anything new though, since you can just give her the 4-piece Pioneer Diver set or the 4-piece Genius of Brilliant Stars set, and from that you'll get her best damage possible. As for planers, because she's a sub DPS, she can afford to lose some damage to buff the main damage dealer. Most of Cipher's damage isn't even her own, as it's true damage gained from your other DPS, so it can be best to give her something like Lushaka to buff your main damage dealer. The Penacony set also works well with quantum damage dealers, but with that said, you can technically give her damaging sets as well, like Izumo with Acheron or Inert Salsoto for the follow-up bonus. Generally speaking though, I would treat her like a sub DPS rather than your main damage dealer, at least at E0. As for main stats, I highly recommend a crit damage body, speed boots, a quantum damage orb, and an attack rope. Running a crit damage body makes the most sense since you'll automatically have 50% crit rate from her major traces, but if you're low on crit rate, you can still use a crit rate body. That's totally fine. Speed boots are necessary for most players to reach the high speeds they need for her traces that give crazy bonuses. Quantum damage orb is just more damage, and an attack percent rope is better than energy regen most of the time. As for substats, you want to prioritize getting to 170 speed at least, and for effect hit rate to constantly hit your effects, you don't need more than 40%, but getting at least 30% would be very consistent. With that said though, effect hit rate is only really important in Acheron teams in my opinion. Other than that, for substats, you want crit rate and damage. It's honestly refreshing to have an easy to understand Amphoria's character because it gives me a lot of headroom for all of the images I've saved in my head. And speaking of images, here's a build summary for Cipher. There are 20 Nihility light cones in the game as of 3.3, and a whopping 4 of them are usable. One of the bigger issues Nihility deals with as a path is that some of them debuff enemies, and other ones debuff enemies by killing them. The options you have for Cipher are pretty limited because there aren't a ton of stats she's looking for other than speed, crit, and effect hit, so everything dot related is basically useless. But because she's mostly just stealing your team's damage, it's okay if she is a bit weaker. You obviously want her to do more, but it's not the end of the world if you don't have a paid option. And even if it was the end of the world, Cipher is probably the only one who's able to stop it anyways. Her best in slot is her signature that gives a huge speed buff and 2 separate defense decreases, and it's actually more than just a best in slot for Cipher. It's also best in slot for Jiaoqiu, Pela, and Silverwolf, as well as second best in slot for Kafka, Speedy Black Swan, and Acheron. This thing is monstrous if you pick it up, but with that said, you can also opt for Silverwolf's signature on her if you have it, and if you don't have either one, maybe just ask Cipher to steal it for you. Your next best options will be the 4-star Resolution Shines as Pearls of Sweat for the defense shred, Solitary Healing from the Herta shop, and worst case you can use before the tutorial mission starts for the effect hit if you're free to play. There aren't a ton of great options for really maxing her damage without her signature, so in that way she seems less free to play friendly, but I don't think any amount of free to play friendliness or lack thereof is going to stop you from pulling after you see those angles. There will also probably be some better light cones for her in the future as the roster expands, so be on the lookout. In the meantime, here's the chart comparing Cipher's damage on different light cones.
This cat is so important to me. Cipher's pretty flexible, can be run in basically any team, but I know why you're really here. You want to know about these two, not really Silverwolf, not you. Well, okay, maybe you want to know a little bit about Silverwolf. I'm gonna go ahead and compare all of these characters and tell you what's good. Since Cipher's announcement, all of the Acheron mains have been frothing at the mouth trying to figure out who is going to be best for our friend Acheron. The reason that's so important is because a lot of people wanted to skip this guy because he kind of looks like an NPC. The other reason is because Acheron mains are always frothing at the mouth for power, and honestly, me too. So here's the deal. Xiaoshu can apply a 35% vuln without his light cone, and also a 15% vulnerability on ultimates. Now the value of that is that essentially on ultimates, which is what Acheron excels with, you're getting 50% vulnerability, which Cipher cannot match. Cipher's vulnerability only goes to 40%. However, when accounting for damage that is not ultimate based, she does have 40% vulnerability, which is technically 5% more than Xiaoshu. In terms of raw vulnerability for Acheron team usage, Xiaoshu pulls ahead, but Cipher is still a good option. But the counterpoint to that is that Cipher deals a fair bit more damage than Xiaoshu. Granted, she's just stealing it from other people, but it's still quite a bit of damage that she's able to add herself. Now, is that enough to offset Xiaoshu? The answer is sometimes, because ultimately the reason why Xiaoshu gets more value than Cipher in Acheron teams most of the time is because of Xiaoshu's field, which causes enemies to take debuffs whenever they move. Against fast enemies in particular, this means more stacks for Acheron and more general value. At the end of the day, there are lots of things that set these two characters apart, but whether or not Cipher is going to, well, it will, depends on whether or not you have light cone options, and also if you have Eidolons. If you have Xiaoshu with Xiaoshu's light cone versus Cipher with Cipher's light cone, typically speaking, Xiaoshu is still gonna pull ahead in most scenarios. However, sometimes E0S1 Cipher can pull ahead. If you want to really see where Cipher can pull ahead of Xiaoshu, you're gonna actually want to grab her E2, which I'll talk about later in the video, but I'll show you right now just so you get the gist. Whenever Cipher hits an enemy target, there's an extra base chance that causes them to receive more damage, which essentially becomes a 70% vuln when you factor in her 40% base vuln. So very valuable debuff, an extra debuff nonetheless, and overall pretty dang good. Yes, Cipher does have her own debuffs that she can apply by lowering enemy damage dealt, but that's not every turn. That's just on her skill, and you may be alternating skill and basic attack. So overall, if you are E0S1 Cipher versus E0S1 Xiaoshu, sometimes Cipher pulls ahead, sometimes Xiaoshu pulls ahead, most of the time Xiaoshu pulls ahead. And if you're at E0S0 Cipher versus E0S0 Xiaoshu, Xiaoshu's probably pulling ahead like 99% of the time. But against E2 Cipher, Xiaoshu loses 99% of the time. Now, what about Silverwolf? I don't know, she's just kind of here. She will likely be very good with Acheron if she receives the proper buffs, so I do think it's worth mentioning, but Cipher and Silverwolf do pretty different things as far as debuffs are concerned, with Silverwolf having defense shred and resistance shred, and Cipher just having vulnerability, but both of them can be comboed together, and quantum teams are going to be pretty interesting going forward. But anyways, onto the teams. Looking at our first team, it's going to be a Fei Xiao setup with Aventurine and Robin. Now, you can actually technically run Lingsha instead of Aventurine, that's fine too, but if you're facing Hule, you're gonna regret bringing Lingsha. Fei Xiao is a follow-up character, and Cipher also is technically a follow-up character, so they can both benefit from Robin's follow-up buffs and Aventurine's follow-up vulnerability. It's not a vulnerability, it's a crit damage buff, but you get what I mean. A debuff that he puts on the enemy. Cipher essentially replaces Topaz in this team, and she does a pretty good job of helping everyone achieve more damage with that vulnerability. And then you also get to play two hot women on the same team. You can also replace Robin with Tribby, and that works out pretty well. Speaking of Tribby, we also have the Castress team with Cipher. Now, this one was able to zero cycle in my previous video because the boss is an Omega Shill boss and Castress is super broken. Cipher can fill in for either Tribby or Remembrance MC, whichever one you don't have on this team. And because Castress does a lot of damage, that means Cipher does a lot of damage, and you might as well make the most of it. Oh, and also, I wouldn't recommend replacing Tribby with Cipher and running Remembrance MC here because Cipher doesn't record true damage, so it's not as good, but it is an option in a worst case scenario. Generally speaking, I would avoid this. And then of course we have the Acheron team. Why not play them both together? Why not just stack vulnerability? you can just do that. But just for the sake of it, if you skip Jiaoshu, you can replace him with any defense shredder in the entire game. You could play Silverwolf, you could play Pela. If you're feeling spicy, you can play Gunaifin. I wouldn't recommend that, but she is kind of funny, so that's fun. And honestly, I guess you don't really have that many options if you're running double naivety, but if you do have E2 Acheron, you can go ahead and play an action forward character instead. If you're wondering if Cipher is worth the pull over Jiaoshu, if you don't have Jiaoshu already, you can go ahead and pull Cipher for your Acheron and you'll be okay. Jiaoshu is going to bring you a little bit more damage in an E0 Acheron team versus E0 Cipher, but both of them are honestly okay and you'll get pretty good results either way. And then of course we have Galagoat. And then another fun surprise is that she works really well with Dr. Ratio because she does apply debuffs, which means that Dr. Ratio gets to follow up much more frequently. Cipher can actually apply just a ton of debuffs basically for free, some with her skills, some just passively, and it's going to help him out a lot in terms of consistency. You may not be doing as much damage relative to the new HP pools as he used to, but if you do like to play him, Cipher is a great pickup. You really can play Cipher in basically any team as long as they're not super true damage focused, because she does not record true damage. But yeah, she's just generally pretty good. And if you like her, she can probably work with your fave. And if you like her a lot, then you probably want to pay attention to this next section where I go over her Eidolons.
If you made it this far in the video, then you're probably already too far gone. So let's just talk about how broken we're gonna tune up this cat. Whatever Cipher was on during the Amphoria story, I want some of it. Her laughs and dialogue were absolutely contagious beyond compare. That cat had the most character of all of the people we met. So that's why I'm E6ing her, and definitely not because I get attacks right off. If you remember my last video, I mentioned that Cipher gets a ridiculous boost from Eidolons. Well, that didn't change. Cipher's E1 makes her recorded damage 1.5 times as much, and whenever you activate her follow-up attack from her talent, she gets an extra 80% attack buff, meaning that she can actually give herself a total of 110 bonus attack in her kit, which is absolutely disgusting. E2 is what enables her to be a beast for Acheron, but also just gives a bunch more value. It allows Cipher to debuff enemies with another vulnerability, this one being 30%. So when stacking these with her base vuln, she can give enemies up to 70% vulnerability, which is a crazy team buff. E3 is an ult and basic attack level up, which isn't a huge improvement, but E4 is a huge improvement. It makes it so that whenever a teammate attacks the patron, Cipher deals bonus damage to it. This isn't a follow-up attack, she just does damage after every single attack done. E5 is a skill and talent level up, which is better than E3, and E6 is, well, let's just say that this version of Cipher wouldn't have died. It increases her follow-up damage by 350%, which is a ridiculous increase, and on top of that, she records an extra 16% of damage dealt by her follow-ups. Lastly, and potentially one of the most crazy things, is that rather than resetting her damage after using her ultimate, she keeps 20% of the stored damage. They really want you to buy this cat. To give you an example of what I mean, here's a comparison in damage with Eidolons. Yes, you're looking at almost 400% of her original damage at E6. But that begs the question, should you get her Light Cone or Eidolons? And to that I say, there's no way you're swiping right now before Fine On in the Fake collab, right? But honestly, if you're gonna do it, I find that her Light Cone has more use cases for your account, but Cipher herself gets way strong with her Eidolons. If you're playing Cipher with Acheron, I'd recommend getting S1 over E1 if you're just going for one or the other, but if you can, I'd recommend E2 over S1 if you can swing it for that team. Either way, both S1 and E2 are going to be massive for Acheron, but outside of Acheron teams, technically E1 does get you the most overall damage in her teams when compared to just upgrading her Light Cone. So the obvious option should be get Eidolon 1, right? Well, actually, if I were in your shoes, I'd probably get the Light Cone first, because it does have a lot more variety of teams that it can be used in, and I think that's a much more valuable tool. So personally, I'd rank S1 above E1, even though E1 does get you more overall damage. Do with that information what you will. I'm going to be pulling Cipher on her release day, and maybe even E6. I'm not convinced yet with Saber and Archer around the corner, but I don't know, I'm thinking about it. That'll be on my Twitch at twitch.tv/Brax with 2 C's, because like Cipher, I'm thick as f***.